It seems as though Hideo Kojima will be leaving Konami after he finishes developing The Phantom Pain. It all began with the release of a new executive approach.
In 2015, the gaming community was taken by storm with Hideo Kojima's unceremonious exodus from Konami. It was a scandal, to say the least. Konami's horrendous treatment towards its employees was exposed, Kojima's name was erased from his most recent major and quite possibly proudest project, Metal Gear Solid 5, which itself is also believed to have been released unfinished due to this debacle, and gamers lost a potentially fantastic horror experience with the cancellation of Silent Hills and removal of the PT demo. It was pretty grim, but Kojima was not done yet, creating his own studio in the very same year and revealing Death Stranding in the next. It was exciting, featuring A-listers and a world design teeming with a bizarre and... babies? Now, make no mistake, there was a lot riding on this. Developers leaving studios to spearhead their own projects is nothing new, but coverage of Kojima's exodus was so widespread that attention shifted onto him intensely. Kojima would have to prove that he is the brilliant game designer everyone believed him to be. If anything, receiving Sony's backing and still hiring a lot of Hollywood celebrities, as well as using expensive software, most likely only intensified that pressure. Death Stranding would be released in 2019 to mostly favorable reviews, and quite frankly, fantastic sales. It was a success, such a success in fact that now, in 2025, the game would receive a sequel. So, with the sequel fast approaching, I thought this might be an ideal time to look at the original and be a critical dick about it to see what we may learn and what we may expect. It's time to ask, was Death Stranding actually good? Time to grab an enormous amount of hilariously stacked cargo, your funky fetus companion, and get ready, cause we're going on a fucking adventure. In Death Stranding, you play as Sam. He is, essentially, a UPS delivery man during the apocalypse, so basically a DoorDasher. The world is devastated by time anomalies, and the game's intro is fantastic at setting them up. It's a deeply cinematic experience that hints quite well at the risk of rain. It's one thing to be told what a timefall does, and it's another to figure it out by observing what it does, like the plants sprouting from the ground and dying shortly after because of the sped up advancement of everything the rain touches. It's not just a detail that is recurring throughout the game, but also an interesting method of onboarding through visual feedback, and this is where I think we should start. With the game being such a cinematic experience, it sets itself the opportunity to use this visual medium to communicate some of its mechanics. Case in point, we see a first encounter with the BTs. Sure, it's a contrived horror sequence where they happen to stop just before touching Sam, but it does tell you quite straightforwardly that while neither you nor they can see one another, they can hear you. And I will not understate the effect this has on gameplay. The first time I, myself, encountered BTs, I instinctively knew to adapt a stealthy approach, and you most certainly should, because the game also shows you what happens if you don't. After you complete a short delivery that lets you experiment firsthand the cargo mechanics, you get an urgent request. Someone died in the city, and the body must be incinerated ASAP. This is the part where you find out how BTs are created. If a body is left alone, it will necrotize and become a BT. But this might be the point where you might ask, why does it matter? We've seen the BTs in action quite a bit, but what do they actually do? And so, the game provides a harrowing answer to that curiosity. This scene is intensely visceral. The corpse necrotizes and the BT that emerges goes straight for Sam's companions. At first, it may look like mercy that Igor shoots his colleague and then desperately tries to take his own life. The game doesn't pull any punches here, and it's as disturbing as it is fantastic as a piece of cinematic content. And then you realize it wasn't just mercy. This is the consequence of a BT coming in contact with a live person. The entire area you've just explored is gone, along with everyone in it. This onboarding sequence, although very long, I mean Christ, it's been more than an hour of cutscenes, tells you some very important things, and it does so seamlessly either visually or through natural dialogue. This is not to say that the game doesn't spell it out sooner or later. It does, but if they wanted to aim for a more subtle experience, they could have certainly done it. So anyway, an hour's worth of cutscenes later, and a tutorial as to how to dispose of bodies should you ever kill someone, you finally get your goal for the game: connect America from east to west. Now, this version of America is awkwardly small since it's been made to fit the game's actual world. It doesn't scale up convincingly to the real physical US or really have landmarks that are reminiscent of it. You also have a lot of states that you cannot reach, like Florida, though I think I'm fine with that. Actually, here's a fun fact. Did you know that if you Google your birth year and Florida man, you get your very own Florida man? It's like your very own spirit animal. Mine was a murderer from a cold case in 1996. That's not great. But if you were born in 2015, you'd get a Florida man who stabbed his imaginary friend and turned himself in. That's way more fun. Anyway, now that we have the premise down, I'm going to move on to talking more in depth about its gameplay, because while I thoroughly appreciate its uniqueness and the effort that went into it, I also think that it has some major flaws that we have to talk about. One of the things I appreciate about indie and Japanese devs is this greater willingness to experiment with gameplay that is unique. If you've played things like Papers, Please, Fatal Frame, Katamari, you know these are unique experiences that stay with you longer than something done to death because of their dedication to non-traditional gameplay. Death Stranding, while being a AAA game, is very much an example of that. Rather than have the bulk of the game's focus on combat, stealth or horror, it's all about the delivery. It's an exercise in quite literally balancing your cargo with the perils you may encounter across vast and diverse environments. At its basis, Sam carrying things has a direct effect on his body, but it's not as easy as more weight, less speed. It has consequences on how you move, because any left or right movement can throw you off balance. The environment's collision design is also complex, because any small rock isn't just there visually, it has actual collision and can make you trip. This is what makes the base of its gameplay solid. It's about engaging with a system where a simple literal turn can have devastating consequences. You always have to focus on making corrections, adjusting your cargo, and think about the terrain you want to traverse, lest your cargo ends up damaged. The game's detailed movement system never lets you turn your brain off, because it doesn't just want to be a game where you go from point A to point B. This personally has been a fantastic experience, because it's been quite rare for a game to be able to command my engagement with every literal step I take. Then you're also allowed to craft tools, which is a welcome addition because your anxiety of traveling to a new area is matched by your capacity to think and plan ahead. Why try to walk around an obstacle when you can use a ladder as a makeshift bridge? You can use an anchor to safely go down, and if you ever need to travel backwards, you can use the same anchor to get up. This is what makes the world of Death Stranding a difficult but fun sandbox. A simple but effective balance, between what you need to deliver, what additional things you can bring, and how can they be used most effectively. The game also has a very strong online component. In your travels, you can find various tools and structures made by other players and use them, and in turn, the tools and structures you make can be found by other players. And it's all done in a way that doesn't necessarily cheese that first journey into unknown land, because these structures only appear after you connect to the nearby settlement. The game has a strong sense of community. I've always appreciated seeing a structure right over an obstacle I found annoying the first way around, and in turn I felt satisfied leaving something behind that might help someone just like someone helped me. These structures go very far in impacting your journeys. You'll start to map them out in your mind, remember that hey, there is a ramp here that is really useful, and then every time you go through that area, you'll use it. There is a very interesting relationship forming between your delivery playstyle, let's say, and these structures. So much so that when they start to deteriorate over time and due to timefall, you'll find yourself trying to repair them and preserve a route that you've grown attached to. Really well executed. It's kind of like that feature in Soulsborne games if people would stop using them to trick you about everything being an illusory fucking wall. At any rate, I also think the game has a really nice variety of tools. From niche stuff like oxygen masks to things that are always good to have like support skeletons, you have a lot of options. The support skeletons are actually my most used tools, and there's a few variations of them. Speed skeletons are fantastic for your mobility, letting you move faster and jump further over obstacles, while power skeletons let you carry heavier cargo while lessening your penalty over speed and stamina, but at the same time also removes two-suit attachments that could be useful to carry tools. It's a constant struggle of determining what can help you reach your next goal efficiently. Would you prefer a standard strike or a long-range strike with more battery power but no cargo space? There's always a trade-off, and you always have to think about your approach. It's also a great example of a progression system that is both horizontal and vertical. Vertical because increasing your grade provides various bonuses, and horizontal because connecting new settlements will give you the ability to craft items that shine in different circumstances. And even then, it's also vertical in the sense that you raising your trust level will often give you a better version of the item, which is a great incentive to keep doing deliveries on the side. Now, since we grazed on the idea of stamina a couple of seconds ago, can I just say, it's nice to experience a game where the stamina system doesn't suck ass. Like, honestly, games have been around for way too long for most stamina systems to just suck. I played some Phasmophobia for the first time and thought to myself, if I'm stuck in a place with a deadly ghost, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna sprint for more than 3 fucking seconds. It doesn't make sense, and it's also not how stamina realistically works. Death Stranding, however, golden standard, and I'm not even joking. Stamina is something that Sam uses at nearly all times, from sprinting to just carrying cargo. It's not something that replenishes naturally, but because you have so much of it, it doesn't end up feeling too limited, and you do have ways of replenishing it on the go. Then you have an extra layer called endurance. This is based on the amount of stamina you have at the moment and is far more limited, but crucially, it's used during the more demanding parts of your journey, like traveling through a river or climbing a steep incline. This endurance system is for most games the baseline stamina, and I genuinely think a lot of games can learn from this. It's a layer of complexity that actually makes sense as opposed to just running for 3 seconds. Then you also have this bit of the bar that is whited out the more you use your stamina. This bit cannot be recovered via any means other than resting, and it does make a lot of sense. While doing something physically strenuous, like say working out, you do your sets, and between sets you get to recover a bit, but you can never recover fully like you were at the beginning of your workout. Really well done, it makes sense, it's not intrusive, all while being a system that you still have to take into account. A similar thing happens to your HP, by the way, because the game has both lethal and non-lethal ways of damage. Non-lethal will not decrease your HP directly, but will decrease from the amount of HP you have, kind of like endurance, at which point you pass out. Now, in combat, dying and passing out is relatively the same thing, since Sam can just come back to life, so if anything it's a little bit more than a detail, but it's a good detail all the same. These are the virtues of the gameplay: a captivating and unique experience, an exquisite exercise in planning ahead, and a thrilling job of balancing literal crates of cargo throughout your journey. Let's now switch the focus to what I consider to be the biggest flaws of Death Stranding's gameplay. I don't think we can overstate enough that designing something unique is difficult. There's no direct inspiration or knowledge you could apply. With enough foresight, you could account for things that may be problematic, but there are a few things that sadly indicate this is not the case. The first is, quite simply, the trike. The reverse trike is a beast of a vehicle, and it's what I've used during 90% of my gameplay. It's insanely good, even in places where it clearly shouldn't. For reference, I'd broadly classify Death Stranding's terrain in 3 categories.
Category is...
Plain terrain, either with small worn paths or lots of small rocks, but otherwise nothing that serves as a huge impediment. This is the ideal place to use a trike, a huge stretch of land that you'd much rather try to travel through fast because there's no complexity to it. Then you have terrain with a lot of rocks and just general earthly formations. If you've used a trike, you know that pretty much any small rock can bring you to a full stop. It's very clear that the terrain is designed in such a way that is very much not ideally traversed with a trike, and I'll admit, at the start I found it annoying to use one there, even questioning what's the point of it if it's such a common terrain type. Until, slowly but surely, I managed to learn how to get around it, slowing down, using wheelies, jumping. Part of this might just be my tenacity with it. I mean, to be honest, I can easily see this being the sort of terrain where it would be much better to just continue on foot. But I think the devs underestimated how much of a pain point it is to leave a vehicle behind just to traverse an area, and then have another stretch of land where a trike would be really useful. In the end, however, the trike can be made to traverse it, so I do think of this as somewhat of a failure in design. But then you have terrain with a lot of steep inclines, like the mountainous region. This is the sort of area where it would make no sense for a trike to work, but it does, and it does so insanely well. You can tell visually that this shouldn't work, but it does whether you're going up or down. And even at its baseline, terrain notwithstanding, using a trike is better because it makes a lot of the cool and intricate balancing mechanics completely obsolete. You never have to worry about tripping or have to even shift weights when taking turns because your cargo simply sticks to you. And don't even get me started on using the ramps. I mean, first of all, it makes no sense that you can just do random tricks while carrying absurd amounts of cargo, but using them makes you completely immune to fall damage. This is why loads of players put ramps high up in the mountains, because not only you can get down faster, but you do so with absolutely no risk to you or your cargo. And that's still not even the worst thing. The game seemingly acknowledges how broken the trikes are. One of the types of deliveries you can do are urgent deliveries. Basically, deliveries where damage to cargo isn't the most important thing, but speed is. They are very easy to do using, frankly, a fraction of the time limit the game gives you, but this makes sense. The game deliberately gives you more than enough time because the grade you receive can vary based on your speed. Fair enough. But then you have premium deliveries, where the conditions for an S grade, basically the highest, are far more stringent. For premium urgent deliveries, your time is really limited, like you have to be fast and not waste a second. But the thing about these times is that they strike me as impossible without the trike. So, did they know how good the trike is and decided to do nothing about it? I find it hard to come up with an alternative to this. Maybe it's the all-purpose terrain skeleton that is the answer, but I never used it. And you'll never guess why. It's the trike, I always use the fucking truck. Sure, sometimes the truck is better, mainly because you have to carry an excessive amount of cargo. You'd have to go back and forth several times even with the trike. And the truck is actually designed to be much clunkier on inclines while being fantastic for rocky terrain and letting you cross rivers safely, which the trike cannot do. Briefly, for a few precious gameplay moments, you get to see how vehicles are supposed to work within the macrocosm of the game. But you know how many times I felt the need to use a truck? Bear in mind that I got the game's platinum trophy. I can count them on one hand. I think it's 4. I can't really remember, because I hardly used one. Tangential to this, I found it quite surprising how the game barely adds any difficulty through the types of cargo you have to deliver. Sure, sometimes you are required to carry an abundance of things, but other than that, there's nothing that requires you to change your playstyle. And the thing is that there are actually several types of cargo that do that, it's just that they are largely unused. The ultra-fragile antimatter bomb makes any vehicle a lot more unreliable for safe transportation. Some stuff can only be carried by hand, which forced me not to use a trike. And also pizza that you deliver to the main villain, yes, you heard that right, adds nuance to how you stack your cargo, because carrying it vertically or having something heavy on top of it damages the pizza. These are things that made me change my approach, but not only that there's not a lot of these, I mean I think these 3 are the only examples, but you also don't encounter these pieces of cargo in standard deliveries, so the complexities they would bring to the table go largely unused. Related to this, I will also ding the game on its standard orders because the system strikes me as quite rigid. All of these orders are already, let's say, pre-made. So when you see a certain delivery, it will always be the same type of delivery to the same settlement every time, and this can get somewhat annoying. I wanted to raise my porter delivery time grade, but to my annoyance, I found that there aren't that many timed deliveries. Same thing happens if you want to raise trust with settlers, because quite a few of them have a limited amount of deliveries with them as a recipient. Now, this is not to say that I think the game should have opted for a fully auto-generated order system, because we all know how stupid those systems can get, but I do think it could have done both. Have some standard orders that are always available, and then some generated ones of random types and recipients. It would be a great opportunity to include more of those unique cargo types I mentioned a few minutes ago, while also making the world feel just a little bit more dynamic. You could get deliveries to recipients that are much further away, rather than have the vast majority of them always be to nearby places. The second major issue is, broadly speaking, a lack of threat. Weirdly. Yes, the game has enemies like BTs, mules, and terrorists, but what I want to highlight is how much of a non-threat they are. I will also say for transparency that most of my playthrough was on the normal difficulty, except for the post-game where I switched to very hard. I did it mainly for these shiny insignias you get from S-rank premium deliveries. They're pretty neat and they show your mastery over the game, but they also still show how unthreatening the game's threats still are. Let's talk about BTs. From a world-building perspective, they are the big bad threat. They can destroy a part of the world if they catch you, and they are invisible. Except that the game lies. They are not invisible. Sure, they are not always visible, but under the right circumstances you can see them, briefly, so you know exactly where they are. And you might say, well, you can see them because Sam is connected to BB, which is fair, except that at some point in the story BB has to be taken away, and you're left to do a few deliveries on your own. What's meant to happen here is that the game tries to make you feel blind while navigating this hostile territory to appreciate BB even more. Except that, and you're not gonna guess this, you can still see them. This is, in my opinion, very strange. The intro keeps communicating that the only way you can see them is via the footprints they form whenever they move, but during gameplay that's not the case. They only move and leave footprints once they've already heard you. This kind of highlights that the BTs were designed backwards. You see, the reason the game shows you where they actually are is to account for the fact that they don't move, at least as far as I can tell. So the game has to compromise to avoid you accidentally walking into them, and that is despite having BB showing you already where they relatively are. This is weirdly nonsensical design-wise, and the way to solve this is actually very easy. Just make them fully invisible, with BB still showing roughly where they are, but also make them move around and leave footprints. This would be consistent with the intro, while also making BT territory scarier to navigate, because you actually have to pay attention to where they leave their footprints. Unironically, this would have the intended effect when your BB is taken away or goes into autotoxemic shock. But there is one thing the game does that is, in my opinion, a massive mistake. And it does so quite early, at the end of episode... which one was it? It's the one where you arrive to Port City, and you have a boss fight against a BT. Big mistake. Huge. The thing about horror experiences is that a huge facet games can rely on is maintaining tension through the threat being absolute. You can't fight it, you can only avoid it. This is not to say that horror games can do the opposite and make the threat something you can fight. Indeed, games like Resident Evil are a good example, but that's because the type of horror at focus here is very different. You can fight the threat, but it's not always smart because it's a game where the conservation of resources is very important, and tension is maintained because zombies can always come from other areas. It's really great. Just don't look over there. Frankly, I think we can deconstruct this issue even further, because why does the game even need boss fights? I'd like to know if I'm speaking complete insanity here, but I don't think that a game needs boss fights to be a game. Death Stranding is a good example of a game where I don't find them necessary at all. I don't see what they do positively for this experience while balancing with the negatives. They don't even strike me as natural to the continuity of the gameplay. These are sections where you need a pretty considerable amount of resources and preparation, and I mean far more than you'd usually have on hand at any time. Even the game acknowledges this, because it gives you a plethora of items. You can't really prepare for these moments, and frankly, you don't have to. The game just says, okay, this is a boss fight, here are all the items you need, off you go. It's what made these sequences feel oddly detached from the rest of the gameplay, aside from being a massive mistake conceptually. The primary takeaway from fighting this BT is that the threat can be defeated. The threat is no longer absolute. A huge chunk of tension just falls, and you might argue that taking down this sort of BT takes too many resources for you to be adequately prepared every time. I'll admit that's true, but all of these things also work on regular BTs, so you can just wipe the threat out of your fucking way with a handful of grenades and guns. America. And if that's not enough, the game also gives you a stealth option to kill BTs by getting close to them, which is an option that will always be available, so you don't even need to prepare weapons for regular BTs anymore. The game essentially trades some of its horror for action, except that 1, it's not that good of an action game, and 2, engaging with this action needs preparation, sometimes a lot of it. Now, you might be wondering why I have footage of me fighting BTs only in the practice room, given that I can't stop talking about how easily they can be removed. And the answer to that is quite simple. Avoiding BTs is really fucking easy. You see, after the game shoots itself in the foot with this boss fight, it grossly reduced my perceived threat that they represent. I started experimenting with them more and more, getting careless, and it helped me realize just how much of a non-threat that they are. It's very obvious that their design is about making you assume a cautious approach, but why waste time with that shit? Remember the trike? I went on for like 5 minutes about how it's the best thing in the game. Turns out, trikes are pretty good in BT territory as well. Because BTs are stationary and actually move pretty slowly in the first few seconds, it's really easy to avoid them. And even if you don't, the game gives you 2-second chances to escape. The moment you come in contact with a BT, a small area around you is covered in tar and you have to try and escape the tar people? At any rate, depending on your cargo, it's not that hard to escape that small circle. It's mainly knowing when to press square and when to regain your balance. It's basically a QTE. And if you fail, you're dragged away and have to escape an even bigger BT. This is your second chance. Your movement may be slow, sure, but these huge BTs always get too confused about navigating the terrain. Escaping them has been really easy because they are insanely bad at what they do. In fact, throughout my playthrough, I never triggered a single void out. All of these factors take the BTs from this immense and scary threat to nothing more than a mild inconvenience. The higher difficulty setting doesn't even make their AI better. In fact, I'm not even sure how it makes the game harder. I think it's just an increase in damage taken, but it otherwise doesn't fix how compromised the BTs are as a threat. Hell, the camera ends up being a bigger threat because of how it keeps zooming in and out. In fact, I decided to trigger a void out on purpose after I was done just out of curiosity, and it's really kinda bullshit. Player-made void outs are actually quite small, and because BTs can only be encountered in specific preset areas, you're never really at risk of destroying anything important. In fact, these craters disappear after a bit of time. The game is really non-committal to this entire aspect of BTs in its world, and it's honestly really disappointing. It sets them up so well, in such a cinematic way, and they are so scary that you're like, holy shit, the first time you encounter them. And throughout the first quarter of my total playthrough, they were reduced to this: a dude on a trike just speeding by them. The human threats don't fare much better. You have the mules, these guys with spears, and their background is really weird. They were porters like you, except that they have some mental issues that cause them to, like, steal cargo? It's a really convoluted excuse to have them as villains. Related to this, there actually was another mental issue people had pre-apocalypse. Apparently, there were no jobs anymore, and some people experienced a lot of negative effects from not having to work, so they just fabricated jobs. The writing is really weird here. I can think of one dipshit who'd write this unironically. And then there's the terrorists, the guys who destroy cities with void outs. They are somewhat more threatening because they don't waste time with non-lethal weapons and just shoot you. Now, early on in the game, you get to partake in a very rudimentary fighting system. And I don't mean bad, but just really basic. It's clear that it's about you learning how to fend them off, but a few hours in, I realized that the best way to go through their territory is to, well, just run. Much like BTs, these guys are really bad at navigating the environment, tripping over themselves, being really bad at catching up to you, and their aim is actually quite shit. If you choose to run, there's really not much they can do.
Why are you running?
It's again obvious that the design is meant to have them as these inconvenient roadblocks, that their territory is to be avoided for safety concerns, but none of that is achieved. The only time they are slightly more annoying is when you have to retrieve something from their camps. But when it comes to opening their post boxes to retrieve items, you can also do so safely because you can use them as cover. And also, I've noticed that gunfire doesn't damage your cargo like 99% of the time. At most, either you or your vehicle is damaged, so you can be reckless without really affecting your performance. Do you see what I mean when I say that there is a lack of threat? The concepts of viable threats are there, but the game's application of them is done really poorly to the point where they are just minor inconveniences. This is the biggest failure of the game, a complexity that ends up doing nothing for the experience because it's not weaponized the right way. When I talked to people about Death Stranding, I found myself surprised at how easily they dismissed it as just a walking simulator. But after playing it extensively, I see where it's coming from. And that's interesting because while they haven't played much, if at all, of Death Stranding, I platinumed it. It's kind of like having the same conclusions at different spectrums of completion. But when you do have a tool that is so strong and inoffensive threats, it is very easy to see this game as just a walking simulator. It's not the sort of situation where, oh, when you strip the game of its features, it's a delivery simulator. It basically still is just a delivery simulator with those complexities, because the design fails to make these complexities have a stronger bearing on gameplay. Let's now switch focus to the story and characters of Death Stranding. These are very important components because it's clear Kojima was aiming for a heavily cinematic experience. If anything, his continued collaboration with high-profile actors and ambitions to be involved in movie productions shows as much. I mean, he put his name in the intro like 3 times. Also, side note, the game makes you sit through the credits twice. And, to its credit, the game does it really well. The acting is solid, and the mocapping and facial expression captures are really good. You know you're doing something well when you capture Mads Mikkelsen's very distinct unnerving look. It's why I was completely excited to see him featured here, because of his previous work on NBC's Hannibal. I also feel that it sets the mood just right. It's this dark and depressing tone that permeates how hopeless the world feels. In fact, I found it very reminiscent of the Dark series from Netflix. They do share some themes about time anomalies, though they are otherwise about very different things. But the score in particular made the stylistic similarity pretty apparent. Now, there's no way to say whether Death Stranding is intended to be derivative of Dark's stonework. If it is, they did it well, and if it isn't, the soundtrack choices are still pretty solid. It's honestly great how the game zooms out and starts playing a somber and melancholic song every now and then. I will, however, ding the game heavily on the fact that it does not have an in-game music player you can use to play those soundtracks during gameplay. Like, there is a music player in your private room, but not outside of it? It's such a large gallery of amazing songs you can't play while you play. Really huge loss here. I will also ding the game on the fact that there are many silly things that take away from the somber mood. Like Norman Reedus does these silly fourth wall breaking animations. There's some cringeworthy gaming references.
Great. So I'm Mario and you're Princess Peach.
And just full-blown homages to other games. Like, I was traveling for a bit and I was like, what the fuck is that? Only to realize that it's a reference from Horizon. These are just really weird stylistic choices that don't really go well with the oppressive and serious design of the narrative.
We run together.
Run?
Yeah. Like Mario and Princess Peach.
At any rate, while the cinematography of Death Stranding is great, what I want to zoom in here is the story, because it's borderline incomprehensive and convoluted and messy. Hell, I tried explaining it to a buddy of mine and I was like, so I go inside of this guy, and inside of this guy there's a baby, and inside that baby there's a cutscene. What? Now, that's obviously a joke, but when you look closer at the game you can see that there's a lot of stylistic choices that are there not because they necessarily convey something, but because they look intriguing and weird. Now, Japanese culture is very big on symbolism, which is very true for this game. It's not what my problem is about, because its symbolism is for the most part well done. Sam's original family name is Bridges because, in a metaphorical sense, he builds bridges, while his adopted name, shared with Amelie and Bridget, is Strand because they're each stranded on the beach in their own way. Amelie's dress is red, which in Japanese culture symbolizes sacrifice. Okay, I'm starting to feel like I'm giving The Door Was Blue because the writer was sad. Anyway, my problem is with a lot of the eccentricities in its design. I remember seeing that World War II environment from one of the trailers, and it was so interesting and intriguing in this disgusting display of flesh and machinery intertwined. It really made me question what is up with this world. And then, having played it, I found out that it means nothing. It's just an aesthetic choice in these sections with Cliff. I can't help but feel like this is a bait and switch. The trailer shows stuff that is so intensely interesting, but it's just there to capture your attention rather than have any meaning. I hate to say it, but it was a marketing ploy. These eccentricities also extend to gameplay features. I mean, there's a lot of nudity. Norman Reedus' ass gets quite a lot of screen time.
I don't need to see your little white ass.
Followed closely by Fragile's feet.
I actually remember I had to. They asked to scan my like underneath my feet for a reference.
But the game essentially adds a lore to shitting and pissing, and that's weird, right? Games never really explore, much less implement a gameplay component to the idea of your playable character needing to go to the bathroom. And honestly, now that the subject has been brought up, I think I've been fine with it all along. I've never used it unless I was forced, because I just didn't see a reason to want to engage with that. So, in my headcanon, Sam is constipated and ready ready to explode. Apart from that, the game is very pretentious at times, like referring to the body and soul as Ha and Ka because I guess ancient Egypt is cool. There's no genuine connection the game makes with ancient Egypt, it's just there to convince you that the writing is smart. It's the sort of thing someone who would refer to terrorists as homo demons would do. And yeah, I get that in a sense it's meant to foreshadow the main villain's connection since his attire is also evocative of ancient Egyptian culture, but at the same time, isn't it just weird for him to show up with fucking Egyptian paraphernalia for no reason? This pretentiousness at times falls short, and translates to a really surface-level, superficial understanding of something. I believe that this superficiality also runs into the deeper themes and motifs of this game. Take for example the theme of fatherhood that is conveyed through Sam and BB. It's clearly intended as a theme, but it starts with such a flawed foundation. One of your first tasks will be to incinerate BB because apparently it didn't do its job well enough. Like, let this sink in, you're tasked to incinerate a living baby because the body disposal people made a lot of mistakes. It's referred to as a tool by the people around you, even though anyone with half a fucking brain and a functioning eyeball would know that it's a live being that can feel things. This perspective makes no sense whatsoever, and look, I'm a homosexual, I don't want any baby in my general vicinity, much less have one screaming through my fucking controller. But I can tell you now, just seeing it as a defective tool to be incinerated is deeply fucked up to the point that it's unbelievable. At any rate, aside from its foundation being shaky, I also think the theme fails because the game has to focus on the relationship between Sam and BB and also your relationship with BB through Sam. The issue with the first is that Sam is just not an expressive character. This is not to say that Norman Reedus is a bad actor. I would honestly not know because I'm not watching 8 seasons of The Walking Dead. But Sam is a very detached character, he's not that emotive. There are some hints that help establish this theme in a way that makes sense, like Sam's pregnant wife who passed away and them wanting to call their child Louise. It makes it understandable why Sam would form a connection with his baby and take care of her more than others would. But the way this relationship develops throughout the game is very ambiguous because it relies in large part on you also developing a connection with Lou. And that bit is very subjective because you have people who are going to find BB adorable on one side of the spectrum and some really disturbing shit at the other. I was somewhere in the middle. Like, yeah, Lou is adorable, but I ain't spending 30 seconds to soothe her when she's crying, I got shit to do. Either way, your interactions with BB are pretty limited. You can gently rock her, at which I was really bad at the start. Let's not think about what that says of me if I was a father. And also a small interaction in your room. But these things don't really sell you developing a relationship with Lou through Sam. Instead, the game does this passively. Lou will increase in affinity by driving, sprinting, and various other stuff you do during deliveries, as in moments where Lou isn't the main focus of your attention. So this ends up as a really poor showing of how this relationship develops, with the game not really managing to sell it to me at the end when Sam and Lou protect each other. Hell, even the game itself undermines it, showing that my affinity with Lou is not at its maximum even after that point. But overall, does this entire experience say anything on the theme of fatherhood? I don't really feel like it did. And the thing is that the game has the perfect circumstances to do so. With Sam being such a detached and closed-off character due to his past trauma, this theme has the opportunity to create some really significant character development. It could make Sam open up and really shake up the monotony that permeates his character throughout the story. It could be used to make him reflect and come to terms with his familial conflict and trauma, which are introduced during the story but otherwise hardly receive any substantiation and significant closure. Like, these are key factors about Sam's character that are introduced, and the story and themes of the game barely tap into that. We actually get to see how good this could be were it not for player involvement being necessary.
If everything was different.
Mama's storyline focuses in large part on the theme of motherhood and loss. This is a bit convoluted, but basically Mama and her sister Lochna were conjoined twins and were eventually separated. Unfortunately, a complication was that they couldn't bear a child independently, so when Lochna wanted to have a child, she would have to conceive and Mama would have to carry the pregnancy to term. Now, this does open up a very interesting conversation about siblings helping each other in bearing children. Not in the incest kind of way, but more like... Oh, you know what? Listen, I'm a gay man, I'm frankly way out of my depth here. But eventually, as she was getting ready for delivery, a terrorist attack left the facility in ruins. Mama survived, but her baby didn't just tragically pass away, but became a BT permanently tethered to her. The loss of a baby is not something many of us can or would ever want to imagine, but for her, it's so much worse, because her baby is still there in a way that is alive, but also very much not alive. Imagine something you love being so close, but at the same time so inconceivably far away. A permanent reminder of a tragedy and the cause for shame and guilt that made her distance herself from her own sister. It's really heavy, and then she has to expose herself to trauma again. The BT forces her to stay there, but she has to seek Lochna out for the sake of the story, so she decides that it's time to cut her connection permanently and let go. This is one of the best emotional sequences of the game.
Good fight.
In the end, they reunite, and even though they don't say much about what happened, they understand what they went through because of their special bond. Results screen, yay! So anyway, after this episode, Lochna just becomes a background character. And this brings me to another criticism I have about the structure of the story and how it deals with character development. You see, the story is spread across episodes, because I guess chapters doesn't sound cool enough, and character development quite literally takes after the game's episodic nature. Most of the major characters you encounter in the story are background characters, and I really mean background here. As in, they talk to you, yes, but don't really shine on their own. They mainly talk to move the narrative further. It's not until the story picks a random character and then dedicates an entire episode to them. Now, that episode will actually add a considerable amount of depth to who they are, and showcase their tragic predicament. Deadman talks about how he feels like a Frankenstein's monster, because he was conceived in vitro, grew up in an artificial womb, and many of his organs were not working or missing, so they had to be replaced. He questions whether there is an afterlife for him, because he does not believe himself to have a soul. Then you have Hartman, who goes into cardiac arrest every 21 minutes and is revived 3 minutes later. It's a loop he cannot stop, but he uses it to search for his family that has passed away on the other side. This is great, but after their respective episodes are done, they go back to being background characters, barely contributing to the story in meaningful ways or showcasing their character. I do want to clarify that my problem here is not with the characters having a moment to shine, but with the fact that that's all they have. These characters exist in a vacuum from which their personalities don't manifest in a way that convincingly connects them to the main narrative. Like, whereas good character work for one person contributes to a narrative in a continuous way and provides meaningful interactions with you and other characters, Death Stranding's character work creates a small peak and nothing else. Now, there are also a lot of minor characters in the form of distribution managers or preppers, with a lot of guest appearances, of course.
I have weasels in my family, but enough about my brother.
I know I don't sound too positive about all of these celebrity guest appearances, because I'm not. I get hiring actors because even though they are expensive, they can be great for voice acting and mocapping, but I just felt like the game sometimes undermines its own tone work and immersion in favor of becoming a spectacle for celebrities and other such references. Either way, I don't feel like these preppers and the distribution managers do much for the narrative experience. At most, the game tries to give them a personality and a bit of a storyline through the mail system, but it's really off-putting how everyone just seems to have an irresistible urge to use a huge amount of emojis.
This would explain some of the most fantastic stories I've heard of buildings being swallowed whole by tar, only to miraculously rise from their depths at a later date looking exactly as they did when they were lost. Squirt emoji.
I don't know, I just found this aspect to be very weird and very much in contrast with the mood of the setting. Now, I want to talk about Sam as a character in a bit more detail. Sam, I wouldn't say is necessarily a bad character, though he is very mid, one-dimensional, and otherwise overall unremarkable to be honest. So yeah, he is kind of a bad character. What I don't like specifically about Sam is that the narrative can't seem to know how to deal with him. You see, as I said before, Sam is not an expressive character. The narrative particularly shows he is just not that interested in whatever is going on. Honestly, what does he want is a bit of a mystery. He just seems to want to fuck off.
I don't want to hear it.
Boo, you whore!
But the point is that he doesn't care, he doesn't want to get too involved, if at all. So the game is in this very awkward position where it has to provide exposition and feedback about your efforts in the world, but it has to do it through Sam. This is what good writing does, by the way. It provides information to you through the main character interacting with someone in a natural way. I talked quite a lot about this in my Outer Wilds video. Regardless, Death Stranding's writing fails a lot in this respect. While the game portrays Sam as a very disinterested person, it's also in the awkward position of having no other way to communicate stuff to you. So you have these characters that can't stop talking to Sam about exposition or things about his progress, and Sam just stands there. Most of the time during your playthrough, Sam will feel like a silent protagonist because loads of characters will talk to him for hours and hours on end, while he says absolutely nothing. It's like someone asked Norman Reedus to say a line, saw what it did to the budget, and then panicked. And the thing is that for him to not say anything makes sense. Again, he doesn't care. But that leaves characters that know he doesn't care still going on and on about things while Sam doesn't care. Sam is the closest attempt I've seen so far of devs essentially putting a 2D cutout between you and a character to pretend that they are talking to someone. But the reality is that the writing simply fails in using Sam convincingly to convey information to you. This is amateur shit, period, and it's wild to see these quote-unquote AAA games still fall for this. Apart from Sam, we have Fragile, a pretty great character, were it not for the writer's insistence to make her as quirky as possible. Seriously, 99% of the time she shows up, her character is about eating those small bugs. I don't know whether to blame it on the game's pretentiousness, or maybe it's that anime trope of making a character mysterious and quirky, but Christ, her character is tired. It's one hell of a way to undercut her tragic backstory, but hey, at least she has a really good motto.
Because I'm fragile. But I'm not that fragile.
You know it's good because they use it like 4 more times.
I'm fragile. But I'm not that fragile.
And then we have Higgs, the, for the most part, main villain of the story, but also a very poor character. That is not to say that he doesn't have an okay motivation. He's a nihilist, which is excusable given Amelie's influence on him. He, quite simply, believes that extinction is inevitable. But whatever point he might have is really undercut by how weird he is, and his constant fucking gaming references.
Just a good old-fashioned boss fight.
Higgs very much feels like a villain taken straight from Metal Gear Solid. His behavior is borderline cartoonish, filled with weird eroticism, and whether that's purposeful or not, he just stands in such a contrast with the seriousness and depressive state of the world. I mean, yeah, you could have a character that has a point or two in his nihilism, that could focus on how survival is not worth it when it compromises so much of what makes our lives worth living. But why have that when you can have mental illness? Yay! At any rate, let's direct our attention to the writing of the story itself. I've said that it's nigh incomprehensive and honestly quite bad. And I don't feel like I'm saying something controversial here. The writing of the story is one of the things a majority of players can agree on. In my opinion, the plot of Death Stranding plays like an overproduced bad thriller movie. It has the tension, the horrifying threat that is both physical and also existential. I mean, any mistake can result in a huge death toll in a world already on the brink of collapse. And what awaits on the other side is a strange realm where souls seem to be stuck in a sort of limbo. That facet of story design is undeniable, sure, but it goes on to do a lot of convoluted and frankly unforgivable stuff. So, the world of Death Stranding suffers from the Death Stranding. Yes, that's how the game refers to the apocalyptic event that triggered all of this, by referring back to its own name. That is already pretentious, but whatever. It is about being stranded on the beaches once you die, so I can see that. Early on, Sam meets with his mother, the last president of America. Wait, hold on. In this universe, America has a woman as a president? Oh god, is this game woke? Come to think of it, being a porter only results in receiving likes, as if you're doing the job for free. Is this communism? Oh my god. Oh my god! So anyway, her dying wish is for Sam to reconnect America by going to each settlement and connecting them to the chiral network. Basically, 5G on steroids. Sam would essentially have to follow the same journey his sister and her entourage made years ago, with the same effort of connecting everyone. But it's clear that Sam is unwilling. It's hinted that there is some animosity between them that extends to his sister as well. And if you are curious as to what happened, don't worry, the game completely forgets all about it, and Sam kinda just gets over it. After she passes, leadership is taken over by Sam's sister, Amelie. And this character throws a fucking curveball to the narrative of the game. We learn early on that she retained her youthful look because she has been stuck on the beach, the web of realms where people go after they die. Which does bring up the question of how is she here? Not literally, I mean. She's using a holographic interface to talk to Sam and Die Hard Man. Who the fuck came up with these names? But how is she on this physical plane to the point where she can interact with technology when she is supposedly stranded on the beach? And that's not all, because later on it's revealed that Amelie doesn't really exist. Yes, despite having Bridges 1 as an entourage, no one had any contact with her or proof that she physically exists, and never questioned that. This is also strange because Sam somehow is not aware of that even though Amelie is his sister. Adoptive, sure, but his sister all the same. This is to build to the reveal that actually Amelie is Bridget. Sam's mother suffered from an operation early on, and because of that her soul became stuck on the beach. This is an example of how convoluted things get, because this apparently enables her to be in two places at once with her body and soul acting independently from one another. But then, if Amelie is just a soul, it is still strange that she can just appear in the physical world and interact with objects just like any other person would. Like, there has to be a set of rules here at play, and for every rule the game follows convincingly, there is another where it doesn't. For example, the game establishes that usually everyone has their own beach in this afterlife realm. Fragile's ability lets her fast travel through her own beach, but can also travel to others by using trinkets personal to them. Then there's Heartman, who can just travel to random beaches, and that kinda has two issues. First of all, why doesn't Fragile help him find his family? And two, why can't he just travel to any random beach? Then there's Amelie and Bridget, showing that the body and soul can live independently. But when Mama cuts her connection with her baby, which is revealed to be her soul, she dies, as if they can't live independently. These are just things that happen with no explanation, contrivances the game has to compromise for to move the narrative and character work along. It really sucks how incomprehensive this gets at times, because there is a beautiful glimpse in a sequence that shows a masterful combination between the laws of this world and gameplay. Towards the end of your adventure, you'll have to get to Edge Knot City, but there's one problem. There's a sea of tar separating you from your goal. This is a cool sequence where you're not told what to do and have to figure it out yourself. You do get a hint in your emails about it, but it doesn't specifically spell out what to do.
Squirt emoji.
In my case, I remember this one BT chase during which I noticed some huge buildings that I knew for sure were not there before. And that's when it hit me. You have to get into a chase with the BT and have the structures form a bridge to the other side. Well, sort of. You just have to get to Amelie and the game does a cop-out and just puts you on the other side. At any rate, this sequence is really good, incredibly gratifying as a puzzle, and what happens when you respect the in-universe laws of your games and know how to apply them narratively or in gameplay. This is the golden standard that Death Stranding merely grazes for one moment and never again. Naturally, this is somewhat subjective, but I can't help how much these contrivances and inconsistencies have impacted my experience with the narrative. And that's far from everything, because Amelie just fucks a lot of the narrative up. Early on, it stated that Amelie was captured by the terrorists, the Homo Demons. Though they do let her communicate, they do not let her leave and otherwise don't monitor her. Weird, but it will make sense in the end. However, later in the story, the terrorists suddenly forget where she is and need Sam to complete the chiral network to find her. This is where we see in full focus how the game twists its writing to manufacture plot twists out of nothing. The idea of, oh, you were actually helping us all this time, doesn't actually work when you think too hard about it. Now, this might just be theatrics, since it turns out that the terrorists and Amelie were actually working together all along. And that opens a whole lot of fuck bucket of questions. Amelie wants Sam to complete the chiral network for her own reasons. Okay, but then why does she send terrorists to stop him several times over? Why do they blow up several cities? Because it both takes away from how strong the chiral network could be and also makes it harder to complete it. Some people even explicitly tell you they are on the fence about joining the network because they fear the terrorists. Amelie and the terrorists make no sense. They constantly fight against their own goal. This is why I say that Death Stranding plays like a bad thriller. It has to manufacture these plot twists and have these gotcha moments that are not earned. It doesn't work towards them. The writers literally say, okay, so now this happens. A very similar thing occurs with Sam and Cliff. As I said before, I was definitely most excited for Mads Mikkelsen's character, so you can probably imagine how disappointed I was when I found out he's just a flashback character. He basically shows up at different points, makes you fight him as if this game is built to be a fucking third-person shooter, it's not, and has no real bearing on the story. In gameplay, he's just a roadblock, and in story, he's there mainly as a misdirect that sets up another twist. The game hints throughout that Cliff is your BB's father. You have flashbacks when Sam connects to Lou, the camera even zooms in on her as if these are her memories. Cliff gives BB a little figurine that is also present on Lou's container. It's very clear what's implied here, but then it turns out that Sam actually was Cliff's son, that he was intended to be at first a BB until Cliff removed him somehow with no one noticing despite being wounded and everyone pointing their guns at him. I have no idea how any of this is meant to make sense, and to be honest, I doubt it's even intended to. It's just a flimsy written excuse to have this be an emotional plot twist, while you hopefully forget to ask too many questions. Frankly, Mads Mikkelsen was wasted on this premise. The last major thing I want to complain about here is, who could guess, about Amelie again. A trope that is usually for the most part crushing to a narrative is trying to humanize a being or event that is meant to be beyond our understanding. It's a fairly cheap trick to deal with a threat made so absolute that it can't really be defeated, thus it's humanized in a way that it can be talked down to or reduced in some similar way. For a good example of how narratively crushing it can be, we can look at the Outsider from the Dishonored series. He's a mysterious character wielding immense power that he shares only with a few, a very interesting being with a design beyond our understanding. And then Dishonored 2 rolls around and it turns out that he was just a random guy sacrificed in a ritual long ago. And then by the Death of the Outsider expansion there seems to be no greater design to his efforts, and frankly doesn't seem to care at all that someone is out to kill him. What an absolute waste of a character. I wonder why there has been no Dishonored game in the past 8 years. I think a lot of us can also remember Mass Effect 3 and the Starchild bullshit it tried to pull at the end, basically humanizing the Reapers as a collective consciousness and trying to reduce the game's climax to a choice with fancy colors.
Ooh, it looks like you were able to barely make it here. We need a new solution. Here, we designed this bullshit final choice for you. Fuck you.
So later in the story you find out that there were several Stranding extinctions, with this being the latest. However, these extinctions are related directly to extinction entities, beings born with a distinct umbilical cord. How exactly these entities come to exist, or why or how they trigger or facilitate these extinctions is left very, and I mean very, ambiguous. But what's important is that Bridget, and by extension Amelie, is the extinction entity of this cycle. And just like that, this unstoppable anomalous event is reduced to a human. This makes Amelie so much more of a narrative nightmare because apparently being an extinction entity means that she must trigger the end of the world. But then she says she doesn't want to serve this purpose, but then she still works with the terrorists, but then she says she wants to be stopped, but then she fights Sam, and then she stops giving Higgs her power to help Sam, but then she still lies to Sam and kicks him out, and then she decides to blow up the world, and it's a mess. I know the idea is to portray a character deeply divided by purpose and desire, but this is materialized into a cycle of Amelie lies and manipulates, then we learn about her deception, and then she lies again, and so on and so forth. It's very messy, like, lady, what do you fucking want? But in humanizing this concept of an extinction within Amelie's character, the narrative now offers a very cheap method to overcome this apocalypse, because this apocalypse can now be talked down to. It's such an unnecessary thing. We don't need to understand the motives of an apocalypse. We don't need to give it feelings or the ability to rationalize. It can simply be a thing that just exists and we have to overcome it. That's kind of the thing. The game displays the world through this depressive lens of just delaying the inevitable. But there is a duality to it. Humanity still has incredible capabilities here. They developed huge structures underground, they can still produce highly advanced things, they learned how to harvest the effects of the timefall for agricultural purposes. The world is in a dreadful state, but it's not hopeless. This could have been a very good focus point rather than artificially making these threats in the form of an extinction entity and terrorist group. In fact, humanity does seem to be surviving just fine without Amelie fucking it up. So she's not just a contrivance to exacerbate this apocalyptic situation, but she's also a cheap trick to get over it. Yeah, you might be able to blow up the world because that's your purpose, but have you considered not doing that? Death Stranding has been interesting. While my instinct is to say that it's been worth it as an experience because I respect going so heavily into a very unique gameplay direction, and I appreciate its efforts to raise the bar of cinematography in big budget games, I do have to be realistic and acknowledge that there are many facets of that gameplay that are flawed, and that the cinematography is undercut by writing that it is to some extent quite bad. I think this highlights quite well who Hideo Kojima is as a game director. He is fantastic at coming up with gameplay concepts that are vastly different but thoroughly engaging. He's able to construct worlds that are intriguing and blow you away. But he is otherwise a very poor storyteller, and he's somewhat blind at identifying where his unique gameplay design may fall short. The cool stylistic touches he adds to the world tend to be surface level rather than have any meaning in a narrative. The unique gameplay experience starts off as interesting and tense, but fails to retain that throughout its game span. Going forward, I don't know what to expect out of Death Stranding 2. Part of me does see it as a story that narratively could be considered concluded as of the first game, especially because the large threat of extinction is relegated to Amelie and she's already agreed to postpone it indefinitely. But I do have some concerns because I can see the same eccentricities in the trailer like I did with the original. Weird but cool stylistic choices like the hand mask thing, the tentacle mouth cat, thoroughly weird shit like going inside of a body and inside the body there is a baby and inside the baby there is a ship, and then stuff that doesn't even feel like it belongs here. Like Higgs coming back as a robot and fighting with a lightning throwing guitar axe against a samurai robot. What the fuck is going on here? Is it cool? Sure, but does it fit in this already established world? Not really. Regardless, I am interested in picking up Death Stranding 2 when it comes out. I know I might not sound too excited for it given how I went on about the failures of this game, and even you might ask why bother if you're gonna be so negative about it. This might sound surprising to some of you, but I am actually really happy when a game turns out to be good, cause, you know, I get to have fun. And I like to think that Kojima has learned some valuable things from overseeing such a large project. I usually don't say this because I think most viewers realize, but even though I get quite negative at times, I don't make all this criticism in bad faith. These are my genuine thoughts and experiences, and I share them because I care about this, and I hope for good experiences through this medium of gaming. It's how we improve things, through genuine discussion and reflection. In the end, I am cautiously eager to pick it up when it comes out and get its platinum. And that's all I have to say for this video. Do subscribe and like to help me out in the algorithm if you see some worth in what I do and enjoy it. The next video will most likely be on Death Stranding 2, because, well, I did plan this in advance. So, tune in next time and have a good one.